understand the settings available to us in Unreal Engine so that we can get the results we want. We looked at a couple of sound cue examples that used a sequenced approach to procedural sound design, changing the order of the sounds in time. We're going to start by returning to one of those cues to have a look a bit more closely at how the random function is working. So in the village, we have some birds, one of which is a blue tit. And we're going to open up the sound cue. Let's remind ourselves how this sound cue sounds. You can see essentially it's toggling between this phrase, playing those two, and a second phrase where it plays that one and then that one. But it's attached to a random node, and that isn't random. A random choice would potentially allow for this first phrase to be repeated. If we look at the random node, what we can see is that it actually has randomize without replacement checked. Now, to look at how this randomize without replacement function works, we're going to focus in on this area for a moment. With this checked, the first time the random node is called, it's going to randomly pick from any of those four inputs. For example, it might choose to play that one. The next time it's called, it's going to randomly pick, but only from the three remaining inputs. In other words, the fourth input has now been discarded. And this time, perhaps, it plays this sound. The third time, it's going to look at the two remaining inputs and randomly choose one of those. And then, of course, on the final time, there's only one input available. It then is going to throw all of the inputs back into the pool and start the cycle again. This approach is really useful for making sure that we've got the largest possible gap before a sound is repeated. So if we started with that sound, we're going to cycle randomly through all the others before that sound might be played again. The implications of this, though, with a random node with only two inputs, is that it will essentially toggle between those two inputs, one after another. In this case, that's exactly what we wanted, but in other scenarios, it may be more problematic. If we go back to our village and find the other sound cue that we've looked at previously, which is the blacksmith, what we want here is for the blacksmith to be banging the anvil, perhaps 3, perhaps 4, perhaps 7, and very rarely drop some equipment on the floor. Now, if this random sound node had randomized without replacement checked, then this equipment drop wouldn't be rare at all. It would in fact always play that sound on every fourth cycle, because it would always chain through and make sure that each sound has been played before resetting and putting them back into the pool. So in this case, we want randomized without replacement to be off, and instead what we've used is these weight functions. The weighting of each sound allows us to control the probability or the likelihood of that sound being chosen. So for example, you can see inputs 0, 1 and 2 have a weight of 1, whereas input 3 has a weight of 0.1. You could think of this as input 3 having a chance of 1 in 31 of being chosen, whereas the other inputs having a chance of 10 out of 31 being chosen. So again, this is a useful function to us, but we just need to be aware that randomize without replacement will essentially override any settings that we've put here, because it will cycle through all of the sounds. Let's have a look at one more example in the village. Over here we've got a chicken coop. And every now and again you get that sound, which is a kind of more excitable chicken sound. So here we've got the calm chicken sounds, and then these are the excited ones. And the proportions here are simply a product of the fact that we've got 10 of these sounds going into that random, and only one of the inputs leads to this more excitable sound. So we do have randomized without replacement. It's going to cycle through all of the sounds, all of the inputs, but because only one of them is the excitable sounds, that's going to be quite rare. Again, it's just a case of balancing out the proportions to make sure that the frequencies of the different sounds are what we want. The random node provides a very useful function, and you'll no doubt be using it all the time. But it's just important to be aware that your weighting settings may be overridden if you have randomized without replacement enabled.